The 2022 season was not only a learning experience for the teams as the new regulations came into fruition, but also for the drivers as they had to adapt their driving styles too. But now we head into the new season, 2023 is upon us, and you know what that means. It's time to analyze the grid through each driver's highs and lows before offering one improvement each driver needs to make, a New Year's resolution if you will, to help them improve their Formula 1 performance. So let's get into it. Let's start off with Alex Albon at the back of the pack with Williams, but considering the car that he's in, I would argue he had a very good season. The highlight for me has to be making it through almost the entire Australian Grand Prix on one set of tyres and picking up points. There is not one analyst who predicted that strategy. His season wasn't as straightforward as a one-stop strategy though, as Alex was rushed into intensive care in Monza following an appendicitis that would lead to the Williams driver missing the Grand Prix and needing surgery. He wasn't in the best of the ways for the rest of the season, to be honest with you. 3 DNFs in the last 7 races and definitely needed the winter break to fully recuperate. Therefore, the only improvement I have for Albon is to not get appendicitis in 2023. The fact that he was even in discussion for points as often as he was in that Williams car shows how great a first season he had with the team. Tsunoda started the season really well, and I felt like the Japanese driver was heading towards a really good 2022 season. I think back to Imola, the home circuit of AlphaTauri, he utilized that knowledge, finished P7, the best result of his campaign, and I think I even made a video about how impressed I was with Yuki Tsunoda considering where he'd come from in 2021, but from Baku onwards, it was another season of struggle. The lowest point of which was probably Canada. I know you could argue crashing into your teammate at Silverstone would be the worst moment of 2022 for him, but I feel like Montreal is even worse because Tsunoda only had himself to blame for driving out of the pits on cold tyres straight into the wall. I feel like this may have been the same improvement I gave Yuki for 2022, but he has to become less error prone. Too many little mistakes cost him so much time in the races, and he picked up a chunk of penalty points alongside that. He needs to be a little bit more disciplined for me, but his third season is ahead of us, and that will be the real judgment point for his Formula 1 career. Helmut Marko is not a patient man. On the other side of the AlphaTauri garage, Gasly also had a tough year. Outside of Azerbaijan, where Gasly picked up a podium in 2021, he also produced his best result of this year, picking up a P5. It felt like he never really clicked with this year's car and became increasingly frustrated. Probably culminating in the lowest point of the season for him being Japan, seeing a recovery truck on a wet circuit led to the Frenchman rightfully erupting, but the incredible qualifying performances of 2021 were nowhere to be seen in 2022, which is something he needs to rekindle in 2023. A move to Alpine is much needed, and a battle with Esteban Ocon is an incredibly tasty prospect. If Gasly can improve his qualifying to the level it was before, he gives himself an incredible platform to build from. And whilst we talk about qualifying, let's talk about Kevin Magnussen. Do I need to remind you of his season highlight? The pole position in Brazil was such a feel-good moment for a smaller team. Seeing him and Steiner celebrate was one of those beautiful moments that Formula 1 occasionally throws up out of nowhere. And to be fair, his qualifying all season was very good. It was the races that would go wrong. The black and orange flag seemed to be reserved especially for Magnussen as he kept getting into collisions at the start of every single Grand Prix, ruining all the good work he put in on the Saturday by having to pit 3 laps into the race. This may be the most obvious improvement I give. Stop crashing. Just stop losing your front wing every time you go into the first corner of a Grand Prix. I know you have to be aggressive when you're in a lower midfield car to get those results, but just take it back like 1% and keep your car in one piece. I've been known to be critical of Lance Stroll, but the Canadian is still young, and it has to be said he is absolutely rapid when it comes to wet weather conditions. His performance in Singapore is the standout moment of the season for me, where he started in 12th place and worked his way up to his season's best finish of P6. As the Aston Martin got quicker and quicker, Stroll felt like he was always on the cusp of points in 11th or 12th or 13th, but he also had some races he'll want to forget. Austin probably saw his worst mistake of the year, cutting across the front of Fernando Alonso, sending that Alpine flying and also ending his own race. He also tangled with Latifi in Australia. It just feels like he has these almost petulant driving mistakes in him anytime he's battling wheel to wheel. Saying that, the Canadian made a lot of overtakes in 2022, which leads to what I think is the major improvement he needs to make, which is his qualifying. He had the second worst average qualifying position of anybody, only Latifi was slower. Zhou had an incredibly under the radar season as a rookie. It really shouldn't be overlooked how good he was in a terribly inconsistent Alfa Romeo car, starting the season on a high by scoring points in Bahrain, but for me the real highlight was his qualifying after the summer break, where he outperformed Bottas in 5 of the 9 races after the summer. I do think he needed the summer break after the crash in Silverstone, which was unquestionably a horrible moment and would have rightfully knocked his confidence, but I was so happy to see him bounce back, even if the gap between him and Bottas in terms of points remained vast. But how does he improve this in his second year in Formula 1? For me, it's his starts. It felt like whenever he qualified well, he'd always drop back within the first lap. He struggled with the hustle and bustle when 20 cars are all heading towards the first corner together. If he can start races better by just keeping position, I'll be happy. Teammate Bottas, however, had an incredibly polarising season. Ultimately, Alfa Romeo owe their P6 in the constructor standings and a top 10 finish in the driver's standings to Bottas' 5th place finish in Imola. He started the season in the mix with the Mercedes cars, remember, and was looking to be a real nuisance for Toto, although that didn't continue, especially in the second half of the season when his engine failed at the Dutch Grand Prix. That was 3 retirements in a row for the Finn, and it felt like he'd kind of given up. Then Vettel picked up some points for Aston Martin, so Bottas reluctantly performed in Mexico to guarantee himself 10th place. The only thing Bottas needs to improve upon is when he has momentum, actually building upon it, which I admit is tough in a car that's so unreliable, but at many points in the season it felt like a bit of a coin flip as to which Bottas was going to show up. Was he going to be out in Q1 or qualify P7 out of nowhere? It was impossible to know. Lando Norris, what more can I say about this man? I know he hates this tag, but the undoubted best of the rest driver for the 2022 season. Outside the top 3 teams, the only driver to pick up a podium and the only driver to get over 100 points throughout the season. It was another campaign in which he was leading the McLaren team almost single-handedly. The only real difficulties he had throughout the season came in Bahrain right at the start, where the car was atrocious, and then Sao Paulo, where again the car costs him as it comes to a stop before the checkered flag. For me, he was the second best driver on the grid in 2022, and I'm a little bit worried that his head will be turned away from the Papaya team fairly soon. With the departure of Andreas Seidel and the gap to the top 3 teams still so vast, it's difficult to give him something to improve upon, but I would say that he needs to develop his ability to be that team number 1 now, especially with a rookie teammate in Piastri. But Norris couldn't stop Alpine from clinching 4th place in the Constructors' Championship, and that was due to an incredibly solid campaign from Esteban Ocon. The standout for me, probably Japan, where Ocon finished in 4th place in that rain-shortened race. He put on a defensive masterclass to hold off Lewis Hamilton. Having said that, the Japanese weekend preceded probably the worst weekend for the Frenchman in Singapore. You never want to be catching the Metro back to the paddock during the Grand Prix whilst in the heat of battle for 4th in the constructor standings. Away from Singapore though, as I said, it was an incredibly consistent season for Esteban Ocon. It felt like he was grabbing points on the regular, but I would say if he does want to improve next season, it's the same as what I said for his now teammate Gasly. He has to improve his average qualifying position, which was actually staggeringly outside of the top 10. Then there's Fernando, and this man is just ageless at this point, still one of the best on the grid. We have to remember that Fernando Alonso stuck it on the front row in the Canadian Grand Prix, although even that weekend ended in frustration. And there were quite a few frustrating weekends for the Spaniard over the course of the season. He often updated us on how many points the team had cost him through reliability problems and the most DNFs of anybody this season, even angrily saying at one point, only car 14 seems to stop. Quite poignantly, even his final race with the team in Abu Dhabi ended with a water leak. At 41 though, there's no sign of the double world champion slowing down as he makes his move to Aston Martin for the 2023 season, where I'm hoping he'll improve his attitude towards the team. I know Alonso loves a little bit of drama and speaks his mind, but sometimes I feel it would be better if he kept his opinions to himself and kept himself out of the steward's office too. Let's discuss Hamilton first when it comes to Mercedes. A first winless season in Formula 1 and his lowest career placing in the standings. Ouch. Definitely a season to forget for the 7-time world champion. It had its ups. Obviously, 5 runner-up finishes showed that he still has it. The car just wasn't quite there for him, which we saw most prominently towards the start of the season. I'm thinking Saudi Arabia qualifying, for instance, or being stuck behind Gasly and Imola for what felt like an age, only to finish 13th. The season got better and better as Mercedes and Hamilton started to find solutions to their early season problems, but I think the improvement they need to make is just continue to find those problems and continue to find solutions together. Russell's first season in silver probably didn't go the way he imagined, but considering the car that he was handed, he did a very professional job, capping it off with a wonderful weekend in Brazil where he won the Sao Paulo sprint from 3rd on the grid and then converted that into the only Mercedes Grand Prix victory of the year too. Don't get me wrong though, he had his moments of contention throughout the season. The crash with Zhou in Silverstone, the comings together with Perez in France, Schumacher in Singapore, which was undoubtedly his worst weekend, or Carlos Sainz in the US, all came with criticism, especially as they never seemed to ruin his race as much as the other driver involved. Having said all that though, it culminated in him beating his teammate, and consistency was a huge factor in his final position in the standings, as the Briton ended up in the top 5 finishers at 19 of the 22 Grand Prix. I don't think he was lap for lap faster than Hamilton, but he was consistent and reliable, which puts him in a great place if he can eradicate some of the villainous collision-causing behaviour in 2023. I might be a little bit biased considering his couple of years at McLaren, but I think overall Sainz had an okay season. Not great, not as good as I wanted it to be, but okay. Undoubtedly Silverstone was the major positive. The Spaniard did everything required of him after the safety car restart. Alright, Ferrari's baffling decision to keep Leclerc out on old hard tyres was a help, but he picked up his first win in Formula 1. Although there were a few speed bumps, or should I say gravel traps along the way that caused him some issues, seeing him beached in Australia whilst we all still thought Ferrari were in contention for titles was definitely the lowest point of the season for Sainz. It was definitely a season that got better as it progressed. As Carlos Sainz got to grips with the car, he was getting closer and closer to the outright pace of his teammate, but that still needs to improve. Leclerc is just absolutely rapid on one lap, and I don't think Carlos Sainz is ever going to beat his teammate over the course of a season in qualifying, but that just means his race pace needs to be even better still if he's going to be able to keep up. Securing second in the championship after the rollercoaster of a season that Leclerc had, I think bodes well for 2023, and he can take a lot of positives into next year. He was by far and away the best qualifier on the grid. He picked up 9 pole positions, and we have to remember, after 3 races, he was 34 points ahead in the World Championship. Nobody predicted how far he was going to fall. Ferrari can't be absolved of blame for the way that the season unraveled. The team made some incredibly questionable decisions, and the reliability of that Ferrari engine meant that Leclerc was taking grid penalties as early as Canada. Leclerc does have to take some of the blame also. The French Grand Prix, where Leclerc was in control, out in front, but drove into the wall, has to be the worst mistake of the season from anybody for me. And the improvement I have for him has to be how he deals with those pressure situations. France, obviously, but also races like Japan, where he picks up a penalty on the final corner of the final lap to hand Perez second place. It's those kind of errors that can be the difference between winning and losing championships in the future. For Sergio Perez, it was so nearly second place in that 1-2 that Red Bull were after, but it wasn't quite meant to be, even with some exceptional driving from Perez over the course of the year. Both of Perez's victories coming on drying street circuits. First of all, Monaco, where he and the team got the strategy spot on, and then secondly in Singapore, where he put on undoubtedly his performance of the season. The Mexican really does come to life in the trickiest of conditions and just shows that experience along with the quality that he has. But sometimes on the arguably easier tracks, he doesn't quite have the pace of the rest of the top 6. Austria, for instance, at the Red Bull Ring, the shortest track on the calendar with loads of runoff space. He was awful. Friday qualifying saw him starting 13th after he exceeded track limits for the sprint race, and then on Sunday he collides with Russell and has to retire. He was definitely better this year compared to last in the Red Bull car, and definitely deserved that contract extension that he got this year, without ever really looking like he was going to actually be in contention for sustaining a season-long challenge with Verstappen. His race pace needs to improve again, as it often felt like he was the slowest of the top 6 on pure pace. Last but not least, Verstappen. Tricky to pick one particular highlight when you win 15 Grand Prix from about 20 really after the 2 DNFs in the first 3 races. A dominant champion, and of course a well-deserved second world title, along with the other accolades like most wins in a season, most points in a season. He was very, very good. The only real error that he made that actually cost him was in Singapore when he dove in and outbraked himself trying to pass Norris. You could say there were other little errors like the spin in Hungary or the trip through the gravel in Spain, but he still won those races, which is mental. The lowest point of the season for me, though, came in Brazil when his character was questioned, as he snapped at the team over the radio when they asked him to let Perez pass. So there isn't really anything he can do to improve on the track, but off the track, there are still steps Verstappen needs to take. That comes with time and experience and age, well, unless you're Fernando Alonso, but I think he also needs to sit down and reflect on a few of those public outbursts that happened in 2022. That just about rounds up my thoughts and feelings on the 16 drivers still on the grid from last season. Who do you think needs to improve most in 2023 though? Let me know in the comments down below, and whilst you're down there, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I'll see you next time.